Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer Wei. I'm a faculty member of the English department at Soochow University in Taipei, Taiwan. I'm very excited to be part of the virtual conference, and I'll be using the next 20 minutes to share my study of mark naming of presidential candidates in the Taiwan's 2020 race with you. I hope that you can hear me clearly and you can see the slides clearly. There's no way to get any feedback from you right now, but I'll be very happy to respond to questions and suggestions later on. So stay in tune and stay in contact. All right, let me start with some background information. I will start with how naming in Chinese is connected to Chinese politeness. And then I'll get into how mark naming is prevalent in high stakes politics like presidential race. And then I'll get into specific cases to illustrate why this is so interesting. And I will share my methodology, which I think is not only interesting, but perhaps can be very helpful for those who want to make similar case in other democracies, because so far I haven't seen any related case being published, and I'm eager to learn more from your work. So let me start with naming in Chinese. Naming in Chinese is a very delicate social and political act. Both linguistic and social cultural factors have to be considered. In most of the cases, it can be very daunting to select the right characters that not only sound right, but also have to have the right numbers of strokes, because numbers of strokes also matter. The Chinese, or at least some Chinese, believe that numbers of the stroke also resonate with how things operate in the whole universe. And if you don't get the number right, that might hinder your future or something like that. But that's beyond this presentation. In any case, the number, the character, the sounds, and the meanings all matters, because it has to match the aspirations of the namers, which mostly are parents or superiors, and the name, which mostly offsprings or subordinates. Another thing that's relevant for understanding naming in the Chinese society is to observe the rules that when you address others, usually we will elevate that person's social status. And when you address yourself, you will try to understate your status or your title. Let me give you one example. It is not very uncommon for Chinese to address whoever worked in the academic circle as quote unquote professor. This is not a lie. This is not a false statement. This is simply a polite gesture to call anybody work in the academic circle as professor, even though the person is perhaps only an adjunct lecturer. Doesn't matter. Because the pressure to give face and to maintain social harmony. Likewise, it is considered wise and virtuous to understate one's own status when you are interacting with others, especially at the initial encounter. So it is not inappropriate to understate one's social status and title when you are interacting with someone you don't really know. At least this should be okay at the initial encounter. So you probably can see there are some pressures of how hierarchical structure, how social harmony, how not to stepping on toes are imposed in this kind of addressing and naming practice in Chinese society. There's one more. That's this one. 正名, to rectify names. This is not just for mundane encounter. This is also perhaps for political interaction. All right. This is what this concept means, is to put each individual in his or her place according to his or her social position. And if you violate any of this, then impoliteness or rude or insult, this can be serious consequences. Let me give you an example from the three candidates to better illustrate what I just said in the previous slide. We have three candidates from three competing political parties. The incumbent, Tsai Ing-wen, from the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party. The challenger, Han Kuo-yu, from Kuomintang, KMT Party. And another challenger, Song Chu-yu, the challenger from the PFP, People First Party. For the incumbent, Tsai Ing-wen, her last name, Tsai, that is the family name. Her given name, Ing-wen, which means brave literary. This is very common for parents who would like their sons and daughters to be great scholars, great statesmen. So brave literary, that's her Tsai, the meaning of the incumbent, who's also the president of Taiwan. The second, for the incumbent, KMT challenger, Han Guoyu. Han is her last name because his last name, Guoyu, is precious state gem. Um, I think this is the aspiration from his parents that not only the son is precious, but should be of great value to the state, the country. Similarly, Song Chuyu, Song is his last name. Chuyu, the given name, has the same character as the challenger Han Guoyu, and it has similar meaning, precious gem, valuable for not only the state but for the family too. Mark naming has something similar to naming in Chinese culture, but it's really taken the naming to a different level. What happens is that in current days Taiwan, both Chinese and Western culture and languages are practiced, and direct presidential election is given every 4 years since 1996. Netizens can use smart names for candidates to protect or provoke the status quo of a concerned issue. So this is totally different from the kind of pressure and rules that we experience in face-to-face interaction, right? In high stakes political race. Well, we're really use naming for a totally different purpose. And mark namings can be found on the candidate's Facebook walls, and either at the beginning of a comment expression, in the middle, or the end expression. This is very much part of an aggressive language to connect or disconnect with like-minded virtual voters. Moreover, the Facebook affordance, such as anonymity, and also the easy access to homophones simply by clicking on a mouse to find a number of homophones. This further helps the spread of mark naming. Okay, and in this next slide, number 3, I'll give you an example of the most common nicknames used for the 3 candidates. Just in the previous slides, I tell you the names, the meaning of the names for the 3 candidates. But here you will see how by replacing the character in either the given name or the family name, that we can change their names, creating a mark name that serve the purpose of either mocking, ridiculing, or making assessments of the candidate. Among the most common features that we observe from this race, homophones and puns are the most prevalent one. And let me just take the incumbent Tsai Ing-wen as an example. By replacing her family name, Tsai, with another homophone, which also has the same sound, but it's a different character, meaning vegetable, we are reducing the candidate to a non-human. Moreover, her given name, Liu Wen, which really should mean great literally, but by mocking the Chinese practice and replacing that with a literal translation to English, we now have a perfect mark name for the incumbent, vegetable English. The challenger, Han Guoyu, which should be originally was precious gem for the state, but by replacing his last character of his given name to something, a character that's similar but has totally different meaning, fish, the candidate is reduced to a non-human, to a fish. And then again, his name has changed from a precious state gem to Korean fish. The last candidate, we're using similar strategy, homophones, puns, and non-human. What we do is to find a different character that sounds similar but has a totally different meaning, meaning that from state gem to leftover, Chuyu to Chuyu. And because Song has participated in the race since 2000, so his name, Song Chuyu, is changed from a precious stone to a state to offer leftover. So hopefully these 3 examples will give you some idea of why and how mark namings are interesting and are prevalent in high-stakes race in Taiwan. To study these names, we go to the three candidates at the walls, and we observe that both linguistic and social cultural variables are incorporated to coin mark naming. We assume that the numbers of variables used and the names given will be varied according to the weight of a candidate in a high-stake race. That means that candidates perceived as most threatening will receive most names, while candidates who are perceived as benchmakers will receive least number of names. And here are our three research questions. The first one is, what are the most prevalent linguistic variables in the race? The second one is, what are the most prevalent social cultural variables in the race? And the last one is whether these variables are cultural and socially specific, or are they common in other democracies such as the USA? And the procedures goes like this. We started our data collection in December 2019 after all the three endorsed candidates registered with the Central Election Committee, and we continue until January 10th, 2020, which is the day before the election. We use the FB feature relevance to filter out the irrelevant comments and to ignore those with profanity or those who were repeated. The results in December and January are separated. We expect that in a high-stakes race, the numbers of naming might vary during different stages of the race. That is the beginning, the middle, and the end, and also for candidates who are most likely to win or least likely to win. And we also separate linguistic factors from social cultural factors in order to help with more systematic comparison among the three competing candidates. All the examples were checked independently by both the author and her research assistant first. Initial results went through another round of inter-rater cross-checks in order to ensure consistency for how and why a mark name was coined by internal and/or external factors. This has to be done because the determination for how and why a name was coined is not always straightforward. And sometimes it would take more than one round of serious discussion between me and my assistant on which factors are incorporated for a certain name. Among these, homophones and puns are the two competing language-specific features for creating mark naming. And I think this is mostly because of prevailing homophones of Chinese characters easily accessed by the keyboard. And furthermore, for mark naming on social media, it is mostly done to form connection or disconnection by way of insulting or poking fun at a candidate. It is easy to understand why puns and witticism or insults can be accomplished by this homophones or near homophones. Now let's take a look at some of the breakdown from the results. In this slide, we have the three candidates, and we are giving general background of the results. In December and January, separated them. You can see the number of posts by the candidates, 19 and 24, 27, 21 for Han, 22 and 24 for Soochow, and also the number of names by the netizens. Note that for the incumbent, who's also the winner of the race, she received 508 in December. The challenger, Han Guoyu from KMT, in December, actually the number of names exceeding the incumbent. It tells you that how netizens are perceiving him very much as a threat, and the number of names for him in December actually exceeded the incumbent. For Song, in December, it's very much lag behind to the two, Han Wen and Han Guoyu, and the number further slide in January. The January data tells a different story, even though there are only 10 days in January, but Tsai's number remained the highest one, and Han Guoyu in January lagged behind, not that much, but he's no longer took the lead. Soochow, the last one. Okay. In this slide, take a look at the results from the internal factor. Puns, homophones, and diminutive. We incorporate diminutive because this is the kind of factor incorporated in more than 1979. This is not very prevalent, but there are a few cases in which we have it. Puns and homophones, and actually homophones is the number one, the most prevalent one, even though, but the differences between puns and homophones are not that great, right? And then again, Taiwan, we see slightly more numbers than Han and Song, and much more so than the Song from PFP. Next slide. we have external factors. We break down 9 different categories for the external factor, but for time's sake, I will only highlight number 2, 3, and 9. Number 2, personality, past experience, job, or instances is considered important because in terms of numbers, the 25 instance for Taiwan in December, 16 in January, for Haugh 24 in December, and 17 in January, for Soochow 9 in December, and 11 in January. Past experience. This one is highlighted because this is also important for the U.S. cases. Number 3 is highlighted because this is actually the most prevalent external factors. Personality, which I include character, IQ, and integrity, matters the most for netizens, not only on social media, but also in real political ways, according to other literature. 81 for Taiwan in December, 81 instances, names. 32 names in January, 91 for Haugh in December, and 15 for Han in January. Some cases less, but then again, important for him too. 19 in December and 13 in January. The last category, non-human. This is perhaps very Chinese. And if you remember from the mark naming for the 3 candidates, all 3 of them being reduced to non-human. And the reason is because once you reduce a candidate to non-human, you can legitimize the act of insulting them. 38 for Tai in December, 39 in January. For Haugh 40 in December and 24 in January. For Soochow 12 in December and 3 in January. In this slide, I will compare some of the cases I found in the US, and I have to say that so far I haven't found any systematic research on all presidential candidates in the US race. What I found is just sporadic examples, but I think this perhaps can still tell us something. This one, the 2 here, honest act for President Abraham Lincoln. This means it shows endearment and positivity for him. Another one is for President Lyndon Johnson, light bulb Lyndon, because the incident that he hates wasted electricity. The next one is the more recent cases. Donald Trump, his component Hillary Clinton, and the most recent one, Joe Biden. Donald Trump has been called by his opponent as the presumptuous candidate, and in return he called Hillary Clinton crook Hillary, and also he was noted by calling Joe Biden sleepy Joe. And so you can see that these are not very positive expressions or assessment of one's opponent. And again, they're using personality as an indicator for why the name is funny. Okay, now let me conclude. There are some similarity between Taiwan and US cases, despite incompatible social political context. Nicknames for presidential candidates are given and used by people who do not really know each other, either by netizens or by the presidential candidates. Mark naming in Thai politics is to connect with those like-minded voters over concerned issues. Both internal and external methods are required to connect with one's supporters, to redefine one's opponent, and or to protect and defend the status quo of a concerned issue. While puns, homophones, and non-human slurs are unique internal and external features, alliteration and number of syllables matter in the US cases. Moreover, social cultural features such as past events, scandals, and usage of stereotypes are found in both the American and Taiwanese examples. They are used to mock a candidate and to simplify complicated issues into dichotomized good and bad moral judgments in order to forge acts of connection or disconnection with voters. Here are some of the references. And I would like to thank the printing agency, also my assistant, Gio Chen, for making the PowerPoint and the tables. And also I appreciate the comments from the 2 reviewers, which have helped improve the presentation. Last one. Thank you very much, and comments and suggestions, please.
What an interesting presentation on candidates' names, because of course so much of that occurs over here in US politics as well, as you pointed out. I'll start with this question that I put in the queue here. This goes back to an early part of your presentation. You talked about the tradition is to elevate the person addressed, to elevate their name and while lowering one's own status, which seems, mere politeness or modesty. But then in politics, the reverse happens. The lowering through puns and insinuations to degrade the candidate. So it's almost antithetical to the traditional naming conventions. Could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, can I respond? Or you're just making a comment?
It seems to me the fact that they are changing the candidates' names to make fun of them or to degrade them seems to be antithetical to the traditional Chinese forms of address, where you elevate the other person.
I think I mentioned this because this is a comment from one of the reviewers of the abstract. I was advised to incorporate how the naming practice is different from traditional Chinese politeness. And I did not elaborate this point too much, but I do think it's a nice contrast. But nevertheless, naming is used for pragmatics. The pragmatics are different. I think for day-to-day interaction, it's mostly for maintaining the status, not to offend the person, at least not immediately. Nevertheless, on Facebook, which the face-to-face etiquette is not very important. Actually, it's not important at all. And what is more important is making connections or disconnection with the potential voters out there. So I think the challenging of the status quo, I think, is the primary factor. And with making fun is a very effective way to get attention. And people seem to enjoy this kind of quote unquote language game, but it's more than that, because I've done this twice. This is the second race that I'm working on. I think it's more than just a language play. It has more to do with how people try to change the status quo, the different issues. Yeah, so I agree with you, but I think it's mostly it's the different pragmatics for online situation and face-to-face situation. Yeah, I hope this.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Here's a question from Joseph Devney, and he asks, Sleepy Joe and Crooked Hillary were coined by candidate Trump rather than by strangers on the internet. Does that happen in Taiwan as well?
No, I apologize because I'm not an expert for American politics. And that question is very, very, it's right. So there's the differences of who is responding, who's making nicknames for whom. But I think if I try to make comparisons of US politics and Taiwan politics, not as an expert, but just as somebody interested in nicknames for politicians. So I apologize that this is not a perfect example to draw analogy between how netizens are making nicknames for politicians. But I think perhaps there is something similar to how politicians are named, even though the namers are different types. One is a politician, but one is a voter. But if you think about people try to defend and challenge the status quo or their the competing candidates, there is some similarities. And I hope this helps. And thank you for the question. Yes.
And I think in the States that people on social media also coin nicknames for candidates as well. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.